So let's just get started. So when you're doing posing, the first thing that you want to do is understand what the heck you're supposed to be looking for. Because if we're just jumping in here and we've got, let's say, this pose here. It's a really cool pose and we have a lot of really cool details to look at. But if you don't know what you're supposed to be looking for, it's just a pose and that's it. It's just random limbs going in different directions. So what do we have to look for? Well, and A to J is already a step ahead of me. He's psychic. For anyone who's new here, A to the J is like a master of resources and one of the most awesome people in the animation community. He is everywhere and helpful all the time. Huge respect for A to the J. So this is a document that Cameron and I put together, and it is essentially a quick checklist of the things that we both look for whenever we're doing poses. Now, there are more things or less things depending on the pose, but this is kind of the general broad strokes. So I'm not going to go through this in depth. If you're interested, you can definitely just follow the link that A to the J posted there. But the basic checklist here is all of these 12 items. We have line of action, silhouette, straights versus curves, or typically also called simple versus complex, weight and balance, asymmetry, simplified shapes, contrapposto and twist, sympathetic action, avoiding tangents, visual anchors, exaggeration, gesture, and character. Yay, all of this stuff. And all of this is explained here, so you can definitely check that out. If you have any questions on any of this, definitely feel free to ask. But these are things to watch out for within a pose. Things to analyze and pay attention to. So we're going to be going through these here a little bit in these poses. So the first thing that I typically look for, and let's actually open this image here. And it's not the highest quality image, but let me just save this here. There we go. And I'll just draw over it. There we go. So not the highest image quality, but it'll do. So when we're looking at a pose, one of the first things we want to look for is line of action. Line of action is essentially the energy that is moving through a pose. And it is not the line of the silhouette here. That's one of those things that a lot of people tend to kind of look for. They just kind of follow the shape of the character. And if you follow it too closely, you start getting into all the anatomical details, which is too complex. We don't want to do that. The line of action is kind of the general line of the character. So here, the line of action, let's keep it simple. The main line of action for this character is this, right through here. So you can see that kind of energy that flows through from the top of the head, down through the body, and up through that leg. This is what I would consider the main line of action for this pose. Now, with lines of action, there isn't just one. You can sometimes have 2 or even 3 lines of action or more in a pose. Usually more than 3, that's a very complex pose. So in this pose, we actually have 3 lines of action. The red here would be what I would consider the main line of action. The secondary line kind of goes through here, down into the other leg. So we have another kind of line of energy flowing through there. And then we have a tertiary line going through here. So these are the kind of the lines of energy moving through the pose. And there's no like solid, here is the exact line and here's the mathematical formula that you use to find it. It's more just the feeling of the pose. And typically the main line of action is what we want the energy to go towards. So in this case, for example, if I was to animate this, I would want that feeling of that leg kind of coming up. It would actually go this way, coming up as his arms kind of do some motion. I would want that to be the main force, that main energy in the scene for this pose. So that's why I personally consider the red one the main one in this case, just based on how I would animate this. So those are lines of action. So with these, why is this helpful? Well, this kind of gives us an idea of where we should exaggerate. How can we push our pose to be more dynamic if we were to redraw it? So let me just take this here. I'm going to copy it. And let's just do a new document here. Where is it? Okay. There we go. So the reason the line of action is important is now if we were to redraw or recreate the pose, let's say in Maya, it gives us an idea of where we can go for. So in this case, the main line of action is something like that, right there. So as I'm now creating that pose, I can use this as a guide and make sure my angles are correct here. Body is angled a little further back. I can use this as a guide to make sure that my energy is flowing through correctly. Now I draw very roughly when I plan out for animation, so I do apologize for the quality here. I don't tend to think of anatomical details when I'm dealing with animation drawing. It's mostly just kind of the overall flow. So you can see I'm thinking of that main line of action there, and I'm using that as my guide. Now, again, how complex do you need to go with it? Well, not really. But it's just a way for us to understand where things are going. And we are not suddenly, for example, if my line of action, that's the wrong brush. If my line of action is doing this, I'm not posing the character out something like this, where the spine, that is a long leg, is doing something like this. Because now, even though I'm kind of getting the main beats of the pose in there, something like this, we can definitely feel that that's not the same. That's not right. The line of action is now doing this. It's not as interesting. And typically the line of action, you can kind of break them down into 3 categories. Straights, Cs, so it's a C or a reverse C, or an S curve. And these go from strong, right here, to weak. The more curves, the more bends you have in a line of action, the weaker the pose will be. The straighter it is, the stronger the pose will be. So an example here is, if I keep changing my brush for some reason, if we have a character kind of posed out like this, and let's just kind of leave the arms off for now, the line of action is very straight, like that. And it kind of gives this dynamic energy to the character. You'll see this in that superhero pose kind of thing. If I kind of bring his hands here and then give him a cape, there we go. We've got a superhero. But if we kind of go with an S pose, something like this, let's actually give the character a little bit more neck. So I just brought the character really far down here. The line of action is now kind of going into this more S shape. This character feels much weaker. It feels very slouched and very low energy. Now, I pushed this a lot. You don't have to go that far. Even with a line of action like this. It's just a slight S curve. Let's actually push it here. And I'm going to exaggerate just a little off from my curve just to keep the character in balance here. So even something like this, it's not as pronounced as that, but you can definitely see that that character just doesn't feel as strong. So, line of action, very, very important for a lot of different reasons. The biggest one is understanding what's happening in the pose, and second, making sure it's a strong pose and is visually appealing. Now, the next thing that I tend to look for, the line of action is usually the first because it's kind of the structure that I build the pose around. The next very important thing is balance. And balance is essentially, can the characters stay on their feet the way they are? And there's two main ways of figuring out balance. You either start from your balance point. In this case, it's this foot here. This is where he is. And Tommaso, hey, thank you so much for the sub. Jeez, 13 months. Jeez, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And actually, there's a question here about balance. So could we consider this pose balanced? Let's actually figure this out. And let's see, my guess is the center line is going through his left shoulder to hips and left foot. So the way you figure out balance is you start from where the character is balancing from. In this case, his foot. And specifically in this case, the toes. So I take that and I just draw a straight line up. And make sure I have the right brush. Straight line upwards here. And that's not a straight line. There we go. Straight line up. Right through there. And then you just look to see if the weight is distributed evenly. So is there an equal amount of mass of the body here as there is here? And in this case, pretty close. I would say he's probably leaning back a little bit more, specifically because the head and chest is pretty heavy. You've got all your organs, you've got your skull and your brain. Those are pretty heavy things. That's probably going to lead him back a little bit. The legs are some of our biggest muscles in the body, but it's still not going to be quite enough in this case. So I would say that this pose isn't quite balanced. In this case, he is either moving forward, so he did some kind of like move forward and he's balancing and arcing his way through this way, or he's actually going to be falling backwards. So this is where, when you're looking at a pose, not only do you have to think about balance, you have to think about momentum. Momentum is extremely important in any pose, because something that feels like it's out of balance and is not going to work at all can change drastically if the character is actually in motion. So for example, here's a pose right here I just looked at. You can see if we look at his balance point here, that foot that's on the ground, draw a straight line up, he is definitely out of balance. All of his weight is screen right. But that is correct in this case and okay, because he is running. He is pushing off this leg and he's actually moving screen right. If his weight was perfectly centered, that foot was in the center of his body mass, he wouldn't be moving. He would just be crouched down in this kind of weird balance pose. So we have to consider, is the character in motion? Which way are they moving? Or are they supposed to be balanced? If a character is supposed to be balanced, if the character is just holding still, that's when we really want to focus on making sure that evens out. A good example of this is motorcycle racing. So if anyone has seen motorcycle racing, you'll probably know what I'm going to talk about here. But imagine a motorcycle. Motorcycles are basically a large bicycle, very heavy. And it's this big heavy machine on two wheels. And if you start tilting it too far, it's just going to fall over. It has to stay balanced, straight up on top of those wheels. But as soon as you start moving and you start turning while moving very quickly, look at how off balance these are. So if we think of our rule, our balance point would be right around here between the two tires. Draw a straight line up. Yeah, they're basically on the ground already. But if we were to actually watch this in motion, they are technically balanced because they are moving so fast and turning that they need to tilt this far over. Otherwise, the sheer momentum and energy that they are creating would throw the person off and tilt the whole motorcycle off the other way. So in this case, because of the motion, I would consider this, I wouldn't call it balanced because then terminology gets very strange, but I would definitely consider this correct. So we need to be very aware of that. Now, the second way you can look for balance in a pose, and let's see, I don't need this window right here right now. The next way you can look for balance is a very similar thing, and this is usually my preferred way, is look for the pit of the neck. That's right here where the clavicles meet, right in the front there, and draw a straight line down from there. It's very similar, but that is just another way of kind of visualizing balance. And here we can see, like we saw with the other line, his weight feels like it's further back. So in this case, like I said earlier, I feel like this pose, there's a little bit of motion in there. This character isn't holding this pose and like sticking on this pose for a minute at a time. There's some sort of motion happening here. So those are the two main ways of looking at balance. And again, we have to think of that momentum. So we've got balance, we've got a line of action. The next most important thing, at least to me, when I'm first looking at a pose and trying to recreate it, is the relationship between the body, specifically the head, neck, and hips. Because this is the thing that as humans, and most people when they first start going into posing will struggle with this. We have a natural tendency to try and straighten things out without even realizing it. So for example, if I was to try and draw this pose, it can be very easy if you're not paying attention. And let me think of the mass of his shoulders here. Okay. It can be very easy for me to do something like this. Let's just put the hips right there. And then that leg comes through here. Yay! Look at that. I got that nice straight line here, there. Perfect. Woohoo! Except I wasn't paying attention to how things line up. What I look for is the center of the head. Let's do this in a different color. Center of the head to the neck, center of the neck, center of the hips. And look at what happens. We've got this curve here. And hey, Jerome, thank you so much for the sub. Hey, how's it going? Bonjour. Hope you're doing well. 28. She's 28 months. How's it been so long? Thank you so much. So we've got this line, and if we simplify it to just straight lines, we get this. If we look at my pose, center of the head, center of the neck, center of the hips. See how straight that is? It's nowhere near as dynamic as the pose that I'm taking this from. In animation, typically we want to exaggerate a pose. We want to make it more. So in this case, he's got this really dynamic arc to his back. I would want to make that more dynamic, more interesting, push that line, not make it less. Certain cases, maybe that is what I want. I want to make it more subtle. But in this case, that's definitely not what I wanted. But I have naturally, because that is a human tendency that we have. We try to put things in straight lines. And it can lead to very boring poses. You'll have a pose that, let's see if we can just find some here. Let's see. I had a whole page of links. Where'd they go? Here it is. No, that's not it. We'll get it eventually. There we go. Here's the page. So let's take a look at this one. And for this, do I have Epic Pen on this computer? I don't think I do. No, just Epic Games. Okay. So if we look at his head right here and make sure my mouse cursor is loading. There we go. So from his head to his neck, we can see that angle back, and then to his hips, it goes forward. It is not a perfectly straight line. Same thing here. Head to neck to hips, everything is leaning towards screen right if we go from the top down. Here, definitely there is a big offset. The center of the head isn't even close to being in line with the hips. Center of the neck, same thing. So you want to pay attention to these. And if you look at your pose in contrast and it's almost a straight line, something's gone wrong. So this is just one of those things that I love to look for because it helps me to it gives me a waypoint to look for and to aim towards instead of just hoping that I get the right line. It also helps to push your dynamic range on the pose. And what I mean by dynamic range is, let's say you have a pose here and you're going to push the line of action like this. Really big line of action like that. Center of the head ends up being here. Center of the hips end up being here. Well, what did we just do? We did a straight line right down. That's not going to be super interesting. Instead, if I take that same line of action and just rotate it. So I'm just actually going to take this, transform it, and go whoop, like that. That's more interesting because we don't line this up directly over top of one another. It just makes it more dynamic. Now, do you always want to do that? No. It depends on the pose. It depends on what you want to get out of it. Should it be dynamic or should it be stiff and very rigid? Think of the food critic in Ratatouille. Every pose of his is super straight. He's just like a board. In that case, they are using that to their advantage to help contrast this character compared to everyone else. So, just something to think about. Now, from there, the next thing that I tend to look for, and again, all of these are kind of covered in that document that A to the J linked out. And in that document, I look for all those things. Every one of them, the silhouette, line of action, all of it. What I'm mentioning here are the kind of the top things that first impression, what am I looking for? Typically. So now we've got two more things that I tend to look for right off the bat. And the first is 3D forms. And this takes practice to understand and to really capture in your poses. The big thing that you want to think about with 3D forms is that our poses, this character, even though we're looking at an image, it's a 2D image on a monitor that's flat. Even though all of it is technically flat, we are looking at a 3D form. It's got depth. It's got different shapes that are overlapping each other. The reason this is important is that it's very easy, especially when you're first starting out, to try and flatten everything out. It's just kind of the way our brains work. So in this case, this pose is already pretty flat, but an example of this is if I was to draw the chest here, something like this. Let's actually try to have no form whatsoever. We just put the chest here, and then the arm is going to stick out from here, and then the other arm is going to stick out there, and then we've got the hips here, and the leg is just going to stick out here, and then the other one is going to be there. Okay, great. And let's even push it further. So this is something I'll see often with student work. is something like this, where if we're sticking with stick figures, it does this. There's no depth. There's no interest here. We can't see what direction things are moving. We can't see what's in front of the other. This is something my brother Cameron taught me when I was taking Animation Mentor, and when both of us were taking Animation Mentor, because I used to do this. I would always think of things in very flat ways, which is weird because I used to do 3D modeling before I started animation as a hobby. So you'd think I would have understood 3D space. When it came to drawings, my brain kept flattening things out. So what you want to try and do is just think of all these things, instead of just lines connecting together, think of them as 3D forms layered on top of each other. So the biggest example here is the hips. The hips are not just a ball with sticks sticking out of it. The hips are a sphere with these giant ovals sticking out over top and behind. So when I'm thinking of this hip here, I'm not just thinking of, okay, the leg sticks out this way. What is the form of the leg coming out and over top of this? And I need to push my angle here a little bit more. Yep, there we go. So something like that. Now, in this case, okay, sure, that doesn't really give us too much right here. Doesn't seem that different. But if we go to something that has a little bit more twist, let's say the shoulders here, suddenly this is what's going to allow us to see which direction things are going. So for example, the shoulder here, the arm and shoulder isn't just a tube sticking out of the body. You have the arm, which you can simplify to a cylinder right here. But then you have the clavicle area, the whole shoulder area, which is right here. This whole area right there. That is a very important thing. This is the whole shoulder lat muscle right here. And then the shoulder blade as well. So we want to think of these forms. So in this case, the arm, without thinking of the hand, is 3 forms that I would look for. And when I'm thinking of that, you can either draw it out, but even if you just think about it, I want to place this form over top of the body here, with the arm coming up and over. And then the other one, you'll notice, is behind the body, right here. Like this. So already, just by doing this, and thinking of those 2 forms instead of just lines, we can see that this arm is definitely in front of the body, this one's behind, and it gives us depth to the body. The other thing you can do is just draw out the contour lines of the objects. So for example, the chest, we've got the center of the chest right here, and it's angled kind of this way. So I can do that. And that just helps to give us a shape to look for. So same thing with the arm. I'm just doing something like this, and there we go. We've got that form in there. And you can do this very simply if you just think of a line right here. Right now it's just 2 lines. It's not super interesting. But the moment I do something like this, oops, make sure I line that up there. Now it's a different shape. It's not just 2 lines, but we get this kind of 3D form that we're shaping out there just by adding these lines. If I kind of do this here and bring this out like so, and then let's kind of do this. Now we've got a bent pipe just by thinking of these contour lines here. So it helps us to showcase where things are traveling. Now, you don't have to do this when you are drawing things out, especially if you don't have like great drawing skills. As an animator in CG, you don't need great drawing skills. It's not that important. It's nice, but not necessary. But the ability to look at a pose and just kind of place those contour lines, kind of think of, okay, which direction are these going? So the arm here is going this way, and then it's going this way. The body, we've got that center line here, and it's angled like so. This can really help you understand your forms and make sure that you're not just flattening everything out into just sticks pointing in different directions. And this kind of leads into understanding the contrapposto and twist of your character. So that is, in this case, there's not a ton of it, but if we kind of look at the body as a box here, the chest is angled this way, whereas the hips, if we were to exaggerate this a little bit, and let's do this in red so it's a little easier to see. The hips are angled this way. So the front of the chest is kind of pointing out this way. Front of the hips is that way. And you can see that there's more twist happening right there. So this is twisting that way. So we want to think of those 3D forms. If we're not thinking of 3D forms, what we end up creating is a flat, just mimic of the pose, but we're not capturing the depth of it. So that's very important and something that I struggled with quite a bit when I first started out. And then the last thing that I tend to look for right off the bat, again, there's a lot more, but something that I just find helps to push the visual appeal is looking for the simple versus complex, straights versus curves. So in this case, on the body, if we look at the overall form of it, you'll notice that if we kind of ignore the front leg here, we get a very nice simple line in the silhouette of the body here. Whereas on the back of the character, we get all of these forms here going through there. So this is something I would try to exaggerate in my posing. Instead of trying to pose out the character and ending up with what I typically call hot dog body, which is you're going to pose out your character here, and you're going to, this is especially true with like very thin rigs or character designs. If you've ever seen Sing or Sing 2, they have a lot of characters that could easily fall into this because they're just bean poles, literally. So if I was to draw this out here, for example, something like this, the body isn't visually interesting because there's no visual design to it. We've got a simple curve here and a simple curve there, and they match. They're tangenting. They're just flowing together. That's not visually interesting. Instead, if I take this and I keep one side simple and then try to exaggerate the complexity, and I don't have to go as complex as what we see anatomically. I don't have to capture every muscle. But if I try to maybe push the lats here and maybe just even push the bend of the spine right there. It's a tiny little thing. But see how we have this now? That's much more interesting. It catches the eye more. So trying to exaggerate that in my poses is something I always try to put a priority towards, because it's just going to make your poses much more interesting. And if I just find the actual drawing here, so higher up, straights versus curves right here. This is essentially what it creates. So it just catches your eye more. It makes it more appealing to look at. So you can even see it in here. This is one of my favorite. When I saw this in Moana, I was like, oh, they did such a good job. Simple on one side, complex on the other. So these are some of the main things that I look for. Once again, there's a whole bunch of other things, silhouette, all of this stuff. But those few, if you kind of take those at first, it really does help to visualize the poses a little bit more clearly and give you something to work from right from the start. So that's analyzing a pose. And we can apply this to any pose that we see. So if we jump back here and go to this pose here, line of action, you can definitely see it's this nice S curve right through here. So that makes it weaker. Weak is not bad in animation. This is essentially, what do we want the character to feel like? And in this case, even though the line is technically what we call weak, it also creates this graceful feeling in the motion. It doesn't feel like she's straining and like pushing a heavy weight. The body's relaxed and flowing like a river. So when we say strong or weak, it's not equal to bad and good. That's not it at all. It's just a different way of experiencing a pose. So we can take a look at that. We can look at our 3D forms, see which way the body is twisting. We can take a look at the overlapping shapes, really see how this arm is overlapping, and even the elbow and shoulder or upper arm, lower arm, that is definitely something you want to watch out for, because a lot of students will have the habit of like trying to straighten those out and flatten them out. But you get this overlapping shape where the elbow here is behind the lower arm there, and then the lower arm is technically behind the hand slightly. So you get this depth of objects. Try to think of it in those different forms. And we can just keep going with all of that. So we've got our poses here. We've analyzed it great. You can use your posing checklist. At this point, we need to start posing it in Maya. And when you first do that, it can be a little tricky. So let me actually make sure I bring in our pose so that we can see what we're going to bring in. So which window is that? This one? No. I have to find the right window here. Yeah, it's not it. There we go. Okay, so let's bring in... we'll go with this pose since we've been analyzing it. So I'm just going to leave that there for now, just so we can see it. Okay. So before we even get to posing, there's a few things that we want to make sure we do. The first is we never want to animate or work on our characters with the default camera. Right now, if you look at the bottom, you'll see that this is the perspective camera. Whether you are animating an acting shot, whether you are doing a dialogue shot, whether you are doing a pantomime or a body mechanics, or just a simple pose, you never want to use the perspective camera, which is the default camera, as your final camera. We just don't. We always want to have at least two cameras. The perspective, which will usually be our work camera. That's the thing that we're going to pan around and move around. And then a camera that's just going to sit there and show the audience what we want to show them. If you don't do this, it just makes posing 100 times harder and you'll never get a really solid pose out of it. So before I do anything, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to create cameras right here and just create a new camera right there. Boop. Like so. Now I can switch my layout here and look through that other camera. So let's look through camera 1 right there. And for some reason, interesting, my tablet just lost its hotkeys. Interesting. No. the moment where you're so used to animating one way and then your hotkeys flip. Or I should say your middle mouse right click flip. So we'll do this with the mouse here for a little bit. Okay, so we've got our camera view here and we can see that camera 1 right there. And usually I'll name this camera. So I'll call this shot cam usually. And there we go. Now, with this camera, there's a few things that I really want to make sure. One, is this is what the audience is going to see. I don't want to see any extra little bits. So I'm just going to go to the show menu, go to none, and then only turn on polygons, typically for a scene. So I just see the character, and then also turn off manipulators and selection highlighting right here. This means that when I select something, we don't see the manipulator in the viewport right there. Normally we would see that. So this allows me to pose out the character and only look at that final image. Next thing, I want to make sure I know what's going to play blast and what's going to be in the final image. So I'm going to turn on the resolution gate right here. This allows us to just easily frame up what we're looking at and make sure that it's not going to get cropped in some weird way. Let's see. I read some game animators, they flatten the camera lens by a lot. Is that what everyone does? It depends on the game. It really just depends on the game. Usually with games, I forget the exact focal length that's the average. I believe it's somewhere around like the 35 to 50 range for like action games. It helps to push the depth and make things feel far away or close up. But if you're doing a game like World of Warcraft, Dota, League of Legends, top-down isometric, the lens length is going to be much higher because it creates that flat feeling to the scene. So depending on what I want here, I would take my camera and I would adjust the focal length right there. Let's say I want to do kind of a portrait, something closer to the character. A 70mm range is going to be good right there. And this is going to help flatten things out. And we can see this with the hands. So if I lower this to, let's say, a 15mm and zoom in, see how one hand just feels super far away compared to the other? If I increase this to, let's say, a 200mm lens, those hands are almost the same size now. The longer the lens, the flatter the image. And I've done whole talks on that, but that's the basic principle for anyone who's totally new to it. If you have questions, definitely let me know. So we've got our camera, we've got our character in the scene. We're almost ready to start posing. There's just a few more things that I like to do. One is I like to create a ground plane under the character, like so. This just allows us to see if the character is actually interacting with the ground or cutting through it. I also like to make sure that I turn on ambient occlusion, which is this button right here in the viewport. Boop. And you can see this just adds shadows under the character. And these shadows are contact shadows. It's shadows that get created when two objects come close together. So if I lift this foot, for example, you'll see that shadow disappears. I bring it closer. Aha, there it is. This just helps us to visualize contacts a little bit more clearly. And there we go. So already I'm in a good place to start posing our character. Now, I don't normally do this, but depending on the shot, I have found it helpful, but especially if you're starting out, this can be extremely helpful, is we want to be able to see the silhouette of our character as we're working. Now, a quick trick in Maya is if you have no lights in your scene, so this character or this scene, I have got my character and a ground plane, nothing else. If I hit 7 on the keyboard, this will activate the lights in the scene. Well, since there's no lights, we just get black. And this essentially shows us our silhouette. So if I do this in my camera view, haha, there's our silhouette. The problem with that is, one, the ground plane is kind of in the way. And two, I also want to be able to see my pose. And I could switch back and forth. That's not a problem, honestly. But it is a problem when I have to hide the ground plane and then double check. And it just kind of gets annoying more than anything. So a quick little trick you can do is I'm going to go to Panels, Layouts, and I'm going to switch this to a 3-pane, and I'm going to split the left right here, like so. And then on this bottom pane, I'm just going to switch this to be my shot camera as well. So now we have 2 versions of the shot camera right there. For this other version, let's also make sure that we can only see polygons. It's the same camera, just 2 different views of it. So like this. And now I can have one of them be shaded, one of them be lit like this, or in silhouette. But that ground plane is still kind of messing us up, isn't it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my character. You can do this in the outliner. I'm going to select the entire thing. So the whole character right here. And then in the viewport, I'm going to click this button right there. So the little checker box with the cursor inside of it. This is Isolate Select. You can also get to it by going to Show, Isolate Select, View Selected. And this will only show you the thing you currently have selected. In this case, the character. It'll hide everything else. There we go. So now I've got this camera right here, which is only my silhouette, like so. And now I can have my camera in place, get it exactly where I want it to be, like so. And I can pose out my character here and see my silhouette at all times. And yes, Control 1 is the hotkey, which is also very nice to have. So Control 1 turns that on and off, that Isolate Select right there, which is really nice, especially when you're trying to just focus on one thing at a time, or especially when you're modeling or rigging. That can be so helpful. So with all of that, we've basically got our character ready to be posed out. Now we could do more things, we could do less things. This is the core that you want to at least have. You want to be able to see what the audience is going to see. You want to be able to have a work area. And if possible, see your silhouette, especially if you're starting out. It just kind of makes it easier to understand and pay attention and not forget about it. Because if you have a view, for example, like this, we can't really see the arms. It just kind of looks like a worm. As soon as you do that, suddenly we have a much clearer silhouette there. So let's get that pose in place. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to match the camera to the angle of the reference here. This is just going to make it a lot easier. If your camera is way off, so for example, this camera, if we look at it, it's straight on, and especially if we look at the foot, it's almost parallel to the character. Or perpendicular, I should say. If I have my camera up here, it's going to be much harder to recreate that pose. Now, you don't have to be exact and make it absolutely the exact same thing. Sometimes we do want to push it a little bit to make it more dynamic and interesting. But it is still important that we pay attention to what we had originally, so we don't just start making things up for no reason. So let's see. Okay. So with this pose, one of the first things that I want to do is I want to start with the core of the character. Now, when you're looking at a character, oftentimes it can be hard to know which controls to use. And for me, typically it's going to be the cog is going to be the most important. The cog, center of gravity control. Sometimes it's the master hip control. There's different names for these, but it's the control that's going to allow you to move the whole upper body together like this. This is going to be one of the most important because this helps you to place your character right through there. From there, for the body, we will typically have either an FK spine or an IK spine. So FK spine, in this case, on this rig, are these red controls. And when you're first starting out, these are the controls I tend to recommend using because these act like the human body. These twist your body and work the way our spine does. And is it possible to lower the background music? I can definitely do that. It does seem a little loud. Yep. Bye-bye. There we go. Hopefully that's good. If ever the music is too loud, too quiet, definitely let me know. Okay. So, FK spine works the way our human spine does. It's very kind of one-to-one. Now, you also have the IK spine. That's the yellow controls. The yellow controls are definitely helpful for more cartoony actions because these are very easy to squash and stretch and just pose out very quickly. But because of that, you'll start to get a lot of deformations if you're not sure how to pose out the character properly. And even if you start to like rotate the spine, oh, it's not broken anymore, it can just be stretched oddly and you start to lose the mass of the character. So in general, when you're first starting out, I recommend using FK spine. It's just easier to maintain the proportion of the character. Regardless of which spine type you use, though, the biggest thing is that you don't want to use multiple spine controls at the same time. So FK and IK. There will be times for that. There will be times where you do want to do that. But in general, when you're posing, you want to avoid it because what it'll end up doing is counter animating. So counter animating is when you have two sets of controls that are fighting each other. And you can see that now I've started separating the controls. The spine controls here are now no longer lining up with the IK or with the actual body here. It gets really messy. And suddenly it's hard to know which controls to use for which action. Don't do it. Ideally, you want to use one set of controls. On this rig, the Jules rigs, and for all the AM rigs, if you don't want to see both controls, you can just select your root and switch the IK-FK controls here. So I just want to see FK. There we go. I've simplified it for myself. So let's pose this out super quick here. Now, when I'm first posing out, what I do like to do is just get the pose very roughly in place. So let's actually get this foot in place because it's going to be supporting all the weight and we can pretty much just get it into place right away. So something like that. Quick note on feet is that if you just slightly rotate them outwards from each other, even if it's just a little bit, it tends to make feet look much more interesting than if you just keep them straight in line. So we've got that foot there, and this is going to be our balance point. So let's make sure our camera is in the right spot. Something like that. Okay. So we've got that foot there. Now for the hips, I'm just going to bring those over top of that foot from the front view here. So I balance that character out. As much as there is a little bit of motion to this character, he's not going to be way off balance and tipping to the side. So I want to think of that balance principle, line from the center of the foot and then straight up, and try to balance him out a little bit. I'm trying not to be perfect here because things are going to change. So we've got that. Let's get the basic angle of the body in place here using the cog, just to kind of get the main action through. And let's balance the character out here. And just to make this easier, let's lift this leg up. Beep. Let's make sure his knee doesn't snap there. So I'm just getting this leg out of the way so I can just focus on the body. And this is when you're first starting to pose, things are going to look wrong. Things are going to look broken. That's okay. As long as you're thinking through what you're doing, that's the important bit. And this goes for any animation, anything that you do in Maya is one of the big things is that you want to think through it. Why are you moving something the way you are? What is going to happen when you do that in terms of the body and the physicality of the character? Why are you doing it? All of these are very important. So what I'm looking at here right now is how far ahead of the foot the knee is. So I'm looking at the front of the knee on the character compared to my rig here, as well as the angle of the back of the leg right here. And the reason I'm looking at that is this is just going to help me get an idea of how far can I exaggerate here. If I do something like this, well, we can definitely see that that's not nearly as far as my reference. Is that good or bad? It's my choice as the animator. But again, it's a choice. I am choosing to exaggerate this pose more. I want more of a kind of flow through this pose. So I'm going to try to get that knee slightly more forward and maybe just a little bit more bend in there. Okay, so there we go. That's pretty... Minister of Silly Walks. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So we've got that there. At this point, let's just kind of get the basic spine in place. Now, when I say the spine, this also does include the hips. Hips and spine kind of work together. It's not just the upper spine. So the character here is curved inwards. If we bring back here, we can see that right there. He's curved in. My tablet no longer has pressure sensitivity. Oh well. So we've got that curve this way, right through here. So let's start getting that in here. I'm going to curve the character forward. And as we do that, you'll notice that I'm losing that angle that we had before. So at no point are we done with one thing. It's not like I moved the hips and then done. I never have to tweak it again. You'll go back and forth for so many different things. So let's actually move the spine back again like so. I'm also going to add a little rotation in here. So if I try to think of mechanically what is happening, his right leg is going forward. He's bringing that leg forward. What's that going to do? Well, sympathetically, there's the word I'm looking for. If you bring, let's say, your arm forward here, your whole chest is going to rotate to help accommodate that. Same thing with your hips. If his one leg is going forward, that hip is going to want to twist and help that. So I'm just going to add a little twist this way to the hips. The other thing that's going to happen is if he's raising his leg up, just like if I raise my arm like this, my whole body tilts. So if I do that, we get that connection here. So from the front, if he's lifting this leg, at least at that height, we're going to tilt the body this way. So I'm trying to think, how do we connect all of this? I'm not just moving limbs randomly and there you go, they just attach to a body. Everything works together. So this is a sympathetic action in the posing checklist. It doesn't have to be perfect right now. Definitely not. I'm just kind of blocking it in and making sure I think about it. Okay. Now, the reason this is going to be important is this is going to also affect the spine. So with the spine, he's curving inwards, but then we have that twist right through this way. And just by doing this, suddenly that's going to help push that pose much more like the reference that we're seeing. We start to get that line in the back, that shape. It's starting to come together a little bit. Is it even close? Not really. It's just like a little bit closer, a tiny bit. Okay. So we've got that in place. As he's balancing here, more than likely, if he's raising this arm up, his right arm up like that, that most likely means that he's going to be kind of bending down on the other side, twisting, like so. If you raise that arm up and then come down on this side, it tends to be more awkward. And especially if we look at the angle of his clavicles, we can see that stretch from the arm up all the way down to the hip. So that's telling me I want to add a little rotation this way. Now this is going to readjust the balance of the character a little bit. So just gonna nudge him over. And as you can see, it still looks horrible. Your pose is not going to look good until quite a ways in. Everything has to start meshing together. And that's fine. As long as we think through everything, we'll get there. So let's kind of just do a very rough version here. So let's get the arm in place. So the arm is going to come up. Something like this. Elbow. We'll say it's bent about that far. And I'm going to do something that I typically see students do, which is I'm just going to rotate the arm like this without using the clavicle. And then the other arm comes forward, like so. like that. And I'll also do the next thing is I won't pose out the hands. This is something I see quite often with student work is not posing out the hands and then not posing out the clavicles. And we'll just push this foot here. Something like that. There we go. Aha! Done. I've got the pose in place. And there we go. Is it good? No. One of the big reasons is I forgot to move a lot of things. So let me set a key here and I'm just going to go to the next frame here so we can compare. So I've done a few things that I typically see students do. The first one and probably the biggest one is I didn't pose out the clavicles. That's these controls here on this rig. The clavicle controls on any rig are super important. You need to pose them out. If you do not, your characters are essentially dislocating their arms. And it creates a very disconnected feeling to your character. Whenever you raise your arm, what's raising the arm here is the clavicle. It's this bone right here that goes up. And yes, I did a whole video on the clavicle. It's that important. So we want to pose that out. And in general, it just kind of moves with the arm. And hey, Chris, thank you so much for the sub. Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I love hearing this song. So good. So in general, the clavicle, thank you so much. The clavicle just follows where the arm is going to go, typically. So if the arm is going up, clavicle goes up here. The arm is going back, so the clavicle will go back. There we go. Like that. And now you can see silhouette-wise, look at how it matches the reference just a little bit more. We're getting that open space there, which is really nice. We're starting to get that little bit more of a design element in there. Is it correct? Not quite yet, but we're going to explore that in just a little bit. Okay, so next clavicle. Once again, that arm is going forward, so that shoulder boop, is just going to go forward like that. And probably up a little bit too. So there we go. We've helped to add that extra little bit in there. I didn't pose out the head. I see this happen on a lot of pose assignments. The head just doesn't get posed. It just kind of stays perfectly straight. It's very hard for us as humans to keep our head just perfectly straight when we're bending our bodies. Usually, and you'll notice with me as well, my head very rarely just goes straight up and down. As I'm talking, my head will have an angle to it. There's going to be a rotation to it. So we want to add that into our poses here. So the head's slightly down. I can see that in my reference. And I'm just going to kind of follow the angle of the body slightly here from the front view. Now, the next thing is the neck. The neck is not going to have a ton of motion, but there's two main things that we want to do. First is by default, the neck tends to lean forward. That's going to help give your pose a more natural look. The second is that we never want to push the neck so far back that we start to get a pinch here in the spine. That's going to break your neck. You always want to flow from the back of the neck into the spine here. So I'm just going to push that a little bit right through here. Like so. Let's get this arm a little straighter. So we have that visual contrast. Okay, and I feel like this could go a little higher here with the clavicle. Really push that. Okay, so how are we feeling about this pose? Well, let's take a look at some of those things that we were looking at before. So let me save as well. If I take my grease pencil tool here and let's see. Okay, yeah, isolate select. So if I take this here and just look at those center points again, center point, center point, center point, and then my balance point right here, we can compare it to our reference. You can see that this is pretty straight here. We're not getting a huge angle, and the hips are pretty much in line with those toes. Well, let's look at our reference. What are we getting? So there, there, there. we're definitely getting a steeper angle here than I'm getting in my shot. And if we look at the center of the hips to the toes, the hips are actually slightly ahead of those toes. Now, is that super important? Yes and no. Because depending on your proportions of the character, you might have to rebalance things from your reference. If your character's got a huge soccer ball, beach ball for a head, that's going to change the proportions, especially if they're tiny little legs. In this case, I do feel like he's too far back. So I'm just going to nudge him forward ever so slightly. Can I exaggerate that? And then whoop, just push that angle there. Make it more dynamic. Just like that. So it's always important. Take a step back and try to visualize what's happening. Yeah, Jules is definitely top heavy. His legs are super thin and he's got this super wide chest. And his head is also bigger than an average human's as well. So very top heavy character. If I try to balance him exactly like the reference, it's not going to be quite right. Okay. Now let's take this foot and add a few details here. For one, I just posed it from the side view. This is again a common issue I see with student work is that they will position the camera in one place and animate from that camera. I mentioned earlier that when I was starting out, I struggled a lot with depth in 2D. Whenever I was drawing, I flattened everything out. It was very ugly. Cameron, my brother, we took Animation Mentor together. He had the opposite issue. He was really good at drawing in depth in 2D. He drew before he started animating, but he had never really done any CG stuff before. And when he started doing CG stuff, one of the common pitfalls he fell into is he forgot to move the camera because he was used to a 2D environment, a flat plane. So he would move the camera into position here, start posing things out, and then that's it. And he would often forget to just move the camera. When we're animating in a CG environment, we always want to be tumbling around. Move the camera and pose it from all angles. So in this case, I'm going to look at the front view and pay attention to what angle his foot is at. It's actually angled inwards, like so. His knee is probably going to be a little bit further out here. Let's actually bend those toes. And Autokey, hello, hope you're doing well. So I'm just going to bend those toes in right there. So something like this. Balance-wise, from the front, he's pretty good. But this arm doesn't quite make sense. If he's twisting, it feels odd that he would just twist his arm over in front of himself like that. So I would want to probably bring this back forward here. Like if I imagine putting my arm forward, if I kind of from my head straight through, my hand isn't crossing over to the other side. It's sticking to that side of my body. My right arm is sticking to my right side of the body, maybe slightly in front. He's not doing this. So I'm going to pose that out there. I'm looking at it from all angles here. The back arm definitely feels a little odd from this angle. So I'm going to just add a little extra rotation. Think of that angle I want here. And then maybe bend the elbow a little bit more. See, what else am I missing? Well, I haven't posed out the hands. So I'm just going to quickly get the hands in place. The hands are probably one of the most commonly forgotten posing elements, which you don't want to do. You do not want to forget to pose out the hands. Hands are way too important for that. Hands should be a part of every single pose you do, even if it's just a quick hand pose. So I pose out the wrists here, and this wrist's a little broken. Let's, twist back this way and twist the arm. Twisting it a little too far here for his hand there. Okay. Now, part of this, the reason why this is breaking is I'm literally breaking his wrist. If we look at the elbow, You see the point of the elbow in the reference is pointing down. So right here. That is telling me, it's a visual landmark, that the elbow isn't doing this. See how my elbow is pointing towards camera? It's this way. Elbow straight up, like that. Or at least very close to. So in my character, if I kind of bend his arm more right here, see how it's going diagonally? The point of the elbow is in the wrong spot. Oop. That should be more of the angle I'm looking for. Now, again, we're not trying to match our reference exactly, but these landmarks help us so that we're not going to break our characters or get weird distortions and things. Okay, so something like that. Now for the fingers, I'm just going to straighten them out ever so slightly here. I'm not going to spend too much time posing out the fingers. And you'll notice that the wrist is a little broken right now. That's fine. I'm not super worried about it right now. I can refine it later. Okay, so we've got that. The other hand, very simple hand pose. This one's a little bit more relaxed. And the thing with hand poses is that once you get used to them, they're not that hard to do. They don't take that long. And when you're first starting out, most rigs that you're going to work with when you first start learning animation, if you're taking an animation course, they're going to have a very simplified hand pose. So only a few fingers to deal with, which is nice when you're first starting out. You don't have to deal with all of the fingers. So something like that. I'm looking at my silhouette, looking at the pose of the hand. See how I can't really see any fingers? It's just like the C shape right there. That is already not interesting. It's just, let's zoom in here. Now, when I'm zooming in here, I am not moving my camera. I'm actually going to lock my camera right there so I don't accidentally move it. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm using the 2D pan and zoom. You hold down the slash key that's above the enter and then middle mouse drag, and you'll zoom in, and it's going to zoom in like it's a 2D image. It's not going to affect any of your perspective. So I can take a look at this hand now and compare it to my reference. And you can see how that's just not visually interesting. It's almost like he's doing this. Bip, bip, bip. No, not fun to look at. So I'm going to try and push this a little bit more. Get that silhouette of the thumb in place here. So what I'm looking for is that separation right here, so that the thumb doesn't just kind of stick into the side of the arm. I'm looking at my silhouette value here. I'm not trying to polish it yet, definitely not, but I do want to start thinking about it. I'm also going to think of the fingers. Right now, already that gave us a little bit more clarity. Let's push that a little bit more. Even just something like this. See how we can now see that little pinky poking through? That's going to give us that visual anchor in there and give us that little bit of visual design through the pose. Something like that. Now that hand pose is a little bit more interesting. It's not just a C, a straight C. And yes, that's a good note there, Fibonacci. If you need to undo a camera move, if you hit Control Z, you'll notice that it doesn't undo a camera move. If I move my camera here and dang it, I need to get it back in place, Control Z is not going to do that. Square bracket, left square bracket is going to undo the camera move. Right square bracket is going to redo the camera move. So if ever you need to undo or redo a camera move, you can do that very easily. Okay. So we've got the pose here in place. Already you can see that hand much more interesting to look at. I do want to get this thumb out a little bit as well. Not too far. Let's flatten out that hand just a little bit. something like that for now. Okay, cool. So what else can we do now? Let's take this. We're going to make a new version. So how do we keep improving it at this point? Well, let's kind of go over those base elements. And again, that posing checklist is going to be very important with this. So let me open it up here. And I'm going to move it to a different window. Which page am I looking for? There. Okay. So as I'm posing this now, what I want to do is I just want to go through this checklist and see how can I improve all of these different things. So line of action. Let's go through that first. So line of action. I've got my line here. It's pretty good. We want that S curve to come through. And right now it's okay, but it feels kind of broken. It feels like I've got a straight line, straight line, straight line. Something like that, more than I'm getting that nice whoop right in there. So I definitely want to push that a lot more. So let's do that. Part of it is the neck. The neck is just straight up and down and is breaking that flow of the pose. So I'm going to push that forward a little bit. And you'll notice that he has a very long neck. You'll see this on many, many rigs. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but depending on the camera angle, it can feel a little odd. So if I need to, I can just nudge his head down slightly or cheat his clavicles up a little bit more. So for example, take this clavicle and I'm actually going to translate it up a little bit to help give a little bit more of that muscle connection in there. Normally I try to avoid translating clavicles, mostly because that's not how our body moves. But if we want to exaggerate, like really get that head down into the shoulders there, it's okay to translate it. As long as we're being conscious of why we're doing it and we're not just moving things for the sake of moving it. Okay. So we've got that there. I think I can add a little bit more tilt to the head. Like so. Now, this is going to be a little of a tangent, but something that also helps. It's not going to really help the entire pose, but it helps us visualizing the pose. Is if you're dealing with a character with facial controls, just do a very simple facial pose on the character. If you don't do that, especially when the characters have like this default just blank expression, it can feel very dead. So just giving a very, very simple expression. So in this case, I'm just going to kind of close the eyes a little bit, have him feel a little bit more relaxed. Already, we get rid of that just dead eye look. I could take the brows. Let's bring them down a little bit, have him kind of feel like he's focused in a little bit more, like he's concentrating. If he's concentrating, his mouth will tighten up, probably. So I'm just going to tighten up the lips. Maybe his mouth corners will come in slightly. And then the whole mouth will come up. It's not much. I'm not going for a super complex expression here. But it's just enough that when I look at his face, I'm not seeing this dead-eyed, just like dead fish looking character in place. Okay, cool. So, super quick facial pose there. Now, going back to that line of action, the head is flowing a little bit better, but the body is not really helping my case here. And there's kind of two reasons for that. One is I'm getting this kind of weird, for lack of a better term, what would be a good way to describe it? Blobbiness to the character, where we've got this big lump here of his spine that curves down here. And then we get a big lump here that then curves in here. And essentially we're getting this kind of shape like this to his chest. Not necessarily a bad thing, but if we kind of look at the center of this here, so the center of this here and the center of this here is just blip, straight line. There's no curve here. We're not feeling that curve through the body because we're getting a curve or two contrasting curves there and there. So to make this feel a little bit more like there's a flow, I would want to exaggerate a little bit more of the straight here versus the curve there if I can. So there's a few ways we can try to do this. The biggest ones to do first are just play with the spine. So I'm going to actually maybe straighten out his spine just a little bit here. Just a little. So that's going to straighten out the stomach. So we get that. And then I'm going to play with the rotation of his body. See how far I can get away with this angle here. And this is where silhouette can come in really handy. If you look at the silhouette, you can definitely see that kind of weirdness that's happening through there. All right. Right now I'm just kind of rotating, see what kind of changes I'm getting there. So just kind of playing to see what I can get by moving him anatomically. So what I mean by anatomically is just moving the spine or moving the clavicles or doing something that is natural for the body to do. The reason I'm making that distinction is the next thing that we can do is that we can start to, for example, translate the spine here. Or in this case, this character has this spine control right there. I can start to use this to help shape that body a little bit more. So for example, if I bring this down here, not too far, you can see how that starts to straighten up. Instead of having, let's exaggerate this bend in here, if I bring this down just a little bit, it straightens that out. The other thing I can do is play with the hips. So if I bring his hips back this way, essentially what I'm going to do is exaggerate the butt silhouette. So right here, see how his butt is very flat? If I kind of stick this back out here and then just rotate it slightly like so, we now have that more prominent silhouette there. We're getting that in, out. And that contrasts more with that flat view right there. So I'm thinking of the silhouette, and I'm also thinking of that simple versus curve. So line of action, silhouette, straights versus curve. I'm thinking of all of them at the same time. So we can kind of push that in there just a little bit. And I do feel like that helps quite a bit there. Now that body is just a little bit more visually interesting. Let's see if I can push it in any other way. No, I think that's good. I feel like I have too much rotation in the upper chest, so I'm going to pull this back here. Usually the upper chest doesn't rotate as much as the lower spine. So something like that. Okay. So now that silhouette value reads a little bit better. We kind of compare what we had before and after. It's not a huge change, but see how we just get a little bit more of a visual difference on the one side, and that line of action, especially with the head, it starts to flow a little bit more. Now we can still push the spine even more when we get into the polish of it, which we're going to get to in just a second. So let's look at the front view here, make sure everything's still working okay. I feel like this arm's just a little too straight, so I'm going to bring it in just a little bit more. I always love looking at the pose from all angles. Just kind of gives an idea of if anything's broken. Okay. So, next thing that I'm feeling is that this leg going up, I'm not a fan of the toes sticking out in silhouette right there. Just the toes. Beep. It feels a little odd. So this is one of those areas where I can actually simplify the silhouette like this by hiding the toes, or just make sure I can see a little bit more of the whole foot coming through here. so I don't just get these random toes sticking out in weird ways. So something like this. Now, I'm also looking at tangents. When I'm posing this out, I'm looking at the line of the leg that I'm getting here, and I'm looking at the line of the foot. If the line of the leg and the foot just line up straight along with each other, that's not going to be good. So for example, if I had the foot out here and it was angled this way, see how they line up? Not good. I want to break that a little bit. Got a visual dynamic there. Okay. We've got that in place. The leg supporting his weight is pretty good. Yeah, for now, I'll call that good. Okay. So with this is pretty good. We've posed things out a little bit more, pushed it a little bit more. Let's see. Feel like this foot may be just a little too far in, so I'm going to rebalance the character out just a little bit more. Let's see. Okay, now there's a good question here, and let me actually catch up on any other questions before we go on to the more polishy phase here. How long did you do 3D before Animation Mentor? I did 3D modeling and rigging and stuff like that it was just a hobby. So it was just in my spare time for maybe 6 years before Animation Mentor. I'd never done any animation. Not a single thing of animation. Just modeling, rigging, that kind of stuff. So yeah, quite a while before. And then you have the value of -17 RY in the FK of the hip. If you want to animate this pose, would this value not affect the movement of the cog? This is where you have to be aware of which controls you're using when. So if this was animating, you'll notice that I don't actually have much rotate Y on the cog right now. So if I was animating this, I would most likely keep most of the animation on the hips here, depending on what the character is doing. If the character is going to spin around, the cog would definitely be doing the majority of the spin, but then I might use the FK hip to add the sympathetic motion and the connections in there. The big reason is if I try to do everything on the cog, every little rotate Y that I do to kind of twist the hips and just add that extra little polish is going to do this to the body. And I'm going to have to counter animate every single little twitch of those hips with the spine, and my spine is going to be a nightmare to work with. So as long as I have the main motion in the cog just nice and smooth, it's getting the main changes of direction, all of that. Any little detail I can add to the hip control, and it might counter animate a little bit here and there, but that's one section that I have to kind of track a little bit versus an entire spine and head and neck and arms that are all going to twitch if I start getting too complex with it. Now, what I don't want to do is counter it completely. So for example, I just did a small tweak, but if I had my cog rotated this way, and then I'm trying to rotate the hips, well, oh no, I've got to rotate them back the other way. That's pointless. I'm doing more work for no reason typically. So it's a balance. And figuring out what's going to save you time in the long run. And did we drink or save one? I did save, but I should take a drink here. Okay, more people reminding me to drink. Thank you. Keeping me alive. Ah, that feels much better. Okay, so let's go into a little bit of the polish of the pose now. So at this point, when I talk about polish on a pose, we've basically got the majority of it in place now. It's pretty good. It's not perfect, but I want to kind of push it. I want to exaggerate that visual design of it a little bit more. How can we do that? Well, there's a few different ways. The biggest one is bend bows. So on this rig, if I select these controls under the feet, there's this bend bow control right here. I'll turn that on. Same thing with the hands. Take the hand controls, turn on the bend bows right there. You'll notice we get a whole lot more controls all along the character here. But these are our shaping controls. Yep. You can start to bend and flex the character in all sorts of different ways. So I'm going to take all of these. I'm going to set a key, make sure I don't lose their default posing here. I can use these to help exaggerate my lines of action and the flow of pose. A very good example here is going to be this arm up here. See how, let's simplify our color here. See how we've got this line of the body, then we get the lump of the shoulder, it dips in, and then we get the elbow. And it's very kind of shaky. Well, I want a nice clean line through here. If we remember that secondary line of action from our pose, right through there, we get this nice kind of flow from one hand right to the other. And I'm not getting that because I'm getting this, whoop, and then across like that. So the bend bows here will allow me to shape that arm just a little bit. And look at that. Now we get that nice clean flow right through. Now you don't want to go too far with this. It's very easy to push the bend bows to a point where the character feels like have no bones like this. Now that arm is just a blur. And maybe stylistically that's what you want. If you're animating on a very stylized type show, like Hotel Transylvania, for example, or The Bad Guys is another good example. But even for more realistic things, let's say a Disney Pixar style short, something like that is going to be much cleaner. So if we kind of compare, I moved the arm, but see how suddenly it just looks like his arm was so broken before compared to where it is there. And I can just very subtly exaggerate the flow of the entire pose like this. It's not a huge thing, but this is where, like when we talk about polish, it's that little bit, it's that adding that shine to it. And usually polish takes just as long to do as everything else combined. It can take a while because of all the different controls you can use. But it's little things like that. Other things that I'm looking for are, again, looking at that checklist. I never stop thinking of this. All of these different concepts. One of the concepts is washing lines. It's a type of tangents. Straight horizontal and vertical lines we want to avoid because they look fake when we have a pose. If you look at the shoulder here, that top line of the shoulder is flat. It's perfectly flat. That's not interesting. So I'm just going to move that off slightly just to kind of create this little bit of a connection in there. If I wanted to push it even more, notice how the line of this shoulder here, if I kind of create this flow, it goes through and then let's actually draw it out here. Goes through here. Ooh, that's a big brush. Small brush. Medium brush. There we go. There. And then it kind of comes up here. There's this weird disconnect in there. It's not bad, but visually it just kind of creates an odd connection in there. So I can just take this clavicle and maybe just push it back a little bit, just like that. See how it creates a little bit more of a flow? It's not much, but it's enough that it just visually draws our eye across the image a little bit more. Right through there. Our eye isn't catching in a weird dip that's happening in his neck. I'm trying to push it so that it's not breaking the anatomy. That's foremost in my case right here. I don't want it to, like, oh, silhouette looks good, and then you actually look at the pose and his arms twisted in a horrible broken way. But I also want to think of what is the visual aspect of this, because in the end, the audience is looking at this as a still image, a 2D image. And I want to create that sense of design to it. I don't want it to just be a random assortment of elements. Okay. So for the legs usually can really get pushed quite far with this. So if we look at the leg here, you'll notice that anatomically we get this line, here, and then it dips down right there. Same thing here, and then it dips down at the knee. And this is anatomically correct. If we look at our character here, is that dip right there. So that's how the leg is shaped. But visually, it's not as interesting. And to be fair, this guy is also wearing pants. So the cloth of the pants is going to stretch and simplify that shape a little bit. So I can take this, and again, it's not much, but see how that line is now just nice and clean, nice and simple. I can also take the bend bow here and just kind of push that angle of the leg a little bit more and get that squish right through there. Same thing with this, trying to push that simple front of the leg right there. Now, if you have, this is very dependent on different rigs. Some rigs also allow you to scale the bend bows. So this is a great way to add just a little bit of muscle tension. So for example, if he's compressing his leg like that, that quad muscle right there, or sorry, not the quad, the hamstrings are going to tighten up, and you're going to get that little bit of pressure in there. You don't have to do that, but it's nice sometimes, especially like if a character's flexing, you can just add a little bit of push in that muscle there, and it just helps. In this case, it's kind of messing up my line, so I'm not going to do that. Okay. I feel like that's pretty good for the legs for now. Gonna narrow that down a little bit there. Yeah, I think the legs are good. Now, for the body. The body has its own bend bows. Every rig is different. Sometimes they call them bend bows. On these rigs, they are called the free spine controls. So this is these green controls right here along the spine. So once again, I'm going to take these and set a key. And these now allow us to shape that body and really push that form. So with this is what's going to allow me to essentially get that nice straight line along the front there that we were seeing in our reference, and get that nice pinch in the body here. Something like that. So now we can start to feel that nice simple line there, complex line there. Now you want to be careful. You don't want to move these too much, typically, because you can start to get some really weird results there. But it's just a little thing that's going to add a lot to your shot. So let's take a look at this. What am I missing here? I feel like this wrist could come down a little bit more. And then let's bring the fingers up. So this is an element of sympathetic action. If your wrist goes down like that, your fingers are going to come up. I've talked about this a lot on stream, but I'm going to mention it again here because it's important. When you're moving your hands, especially in a relaxed state, fingers don't overlap and they don't just drag. So if your hand is, let's say, flat like this, your fingers aren't just going to get pulled down by gravity. No matter what, they're always pulled down. That's not what happens. Your fingers are controlled by tendons that run from the fingertips all the way down into your arm. You do this, you can see them moving. All that muscle there, you can see them right through there. You can see it in the back right here. Let's make sure the light can catch that. See all of that motion that's happening here? Those are all the tendons that are controlling my fingers. All happening through there. So that means that because there's no muscle in your fingers, they're all controlled by tendons, your fingers are under tension. And if you were to bend your arm down like I did, like that, notice how my fingers straighten out. And if I straighten my hand, my fingers curl more, like that. If I go further the other way, they close, like this. And it doesn't matter whichever angle your hand is. So if I do this, you'll notice that as I go through this way, my fingers curl, go this way, they straighten. And that's because the tendons, if I bend my hand this way, the tendons along the back of your hand are being stretched along the bend of your wrist, straightening these, pulling your fingers tight. If you go this way, these tendons are now being put under pressure, and it curls your fingers in. And this is very important because if your character is relaxed, like my character is doing, and he's got his hand up and he's going to bend his hand forward, his fingers will straighten versus this where they'll bend. And this is also why if ever you do a fist and then pull your hand back like this. You'll notice that you can make a much stronger fist because those tendons are being pulled here and helping to make that fist tighter. Do a fist and go forward and try to do as strong a fist as you can. You'll notice that you can't make it as tight. Same thing if you tighten your fingers the other way. If you go forward like this, you'll notice that you can bend your fingers quite a ways back. Quite a ways there. If you go back the other way, I'm trying to straighten my fingers, and the more I try, my hand is actually straightening right there. Compared to this, where my fingers are bent, like you can see, boop, back like that. Because once again, the tendons are helping in this case, fighting in this case. So as I'm doing that, when I moved his hand, I was creating a disconnect in that pose where his fingers weren't matching the angle of the wrist anymore. So we want to watch out for that. Okay. What else can we look for? Well, we can look for more silhouette issues. So one thing I'm noticing on my pose, and this is no longer looking at the reference, just kind of thinking of the silhouette, is this thumb right here. By pointing out like this, it's kind of drawing attention in a weird way and creating a weird tangent with the top of his head. It's like the thumb is lining up with the top of the head there. I'm just going to bring this up and kind of point it towards the fingers a little bit more to kind of clean that up. I feel like the head could tilt down a little bit so that the chin kind of draws the line into the arm there. And yeah, overall, the biggest thing that I'm finding is that this leg, ideally what I would want is just to kind of hide that foot. Something like this. And normally I would do that for this pose. Even though silhouette wise, it kind of looks a little like maybe a foot is missing, it simplifies it. The problem is that his shoes are the same color as his pants. And that is a big problem because value-wise, that foot is going to disappear. So because of that, I want to break that foot out in silhouette visually. It's the same thing. I'm wearing a gray shirt here. If I pose out my hand here, it's totally fine. You can see it very clearly. But if I pose out my hand here, the details on the fingers get lost because my neck is very similar in tone to my fingers. Same thing with, let's say I have this pen here. If I hold it up in front of my face, it's pretty easy to see. If I hold it in front of my shirt, less easy. If I hold it in front of that area there, even though in silhouette of my body, super clear, it just disappears because it's in front of a black object. So we want to think of color value as well as shape value when you're thinking of your silhouette. And in this case, the shoes just disappear because of that color value. So we've got that. Let's kind of review here. It's always good to double check things. So I'm going to look at the center of the neck, to the spine, to the hips. How is that looking? Look at my center line here. Yeah, the balance point is there. I feel like I could push maybe the pose a little bit more. Exaggerate. Maybe push the character forward a little bit more. Just a little. Make sure I grab that foot at the same time. Just get more of a dynamic line through there. Let's see. Yeah, that's pretty good for now. Now, another element of posing is taking a break. We've been working at this pose for a while. Now, to be fair, it takes a while when you're explaining every little thing about it. But we have been working at it for a while. It could have been 10 minutes. It could have been an hour. Regardless, don't try to get a pose to be absolutely perfect on your first pass. Do a pose, work on it some, move on to the next pose. Especially if you're animating. Do a little bit of work there. Go on to the next pose. And then go back to the first. You're going to see some mistakes that didn't stand out to you early on. If you're trying to get every pose perfect as you get to them, so I get to this pose, make it perfect. Go to the next pose. Make it perfect. Polish it. Get everything done. You're going to go back to the first pose and then notice, oh, shoot, I totally forgot about this thing. Or, oh, now I'm noticing an issue that I didn't notice before. Or, more likely, oh, wait, that pose doesn't match the next pose in my animation anymore. I've got to make a change. You've just spent a lot of time polishing a pose only to have to repolish it again. So you want to kind of work quickly while still thinking things through. You're not rushing, but you do a quick pass and then come back a little bit later. It's going to refresh your eyes and make it a lot easier to notice if anything is actually wrong with the pose. So at this point in my process, I would want to take a step back. I would actually want to just do something else, come back here, see if anything stands out that I could fix, or get some feedback. Ask someone to take a look at the pose. So we've got something like that. Now, let's look at it compared to that first version we had. There. You'll notice, not a huge difference right through there. But it's the little things that make the differences. Here, we've got no hand poses. That already kills a lot of it. The neck and head aren't posed, and it makes it so that the line of action, it doesn't feel complete. It feels like something's missing. The shape of the body, because we didn't think of that simple versus complex, there's no visual interest there. The body just feels equal on both sides. We get blip, blip. There we go. That's it. If we compare it to the other one, we get straight versus curve right there. It just makes it more interesting to look at. The biggest thing is the clavicles. When you don't pose out your clavicles, your arms are broken. That shoulder here is all wrong. Compared to this one, where not only does it feel correct, but because of the benbows, the whole part anatomically flows into the whole body. The legs, they didn't change all that much throughout the whole thing, but those benbows really help to give that feeling that the muscle is compressing and doing something, even though we have no muscle simulation in there. So not a huge difference, but it does make enough of a difference that you go from okay, or even like sometimes, oh, that's not great, to, oh, now it works. So yeah, it's the little things that oftentimes really help. And not only that, but we made sure that the pose works from the front view. You can see here that look at that arm. That is so bad. But we reposed everything and now it works from that front view. That foot isn't just straight up and down. It's not broken. So we really want to think of that, of all of these elements. A pose is not just a simple, just move things and then done. Get the angles of the arms in, you're good. It's an in-depth process. So I hope that helps. I know I said it was going to be a quick demo and I just ended up going super in-depth on a lot of things, but hopefully that helps. And especially if you're going into classes 4, 5, 6 at Animation Mentor or any animation program, you're doing acting shots. At that point, it is very easy, and I've seen this happen with many students. It happened to me when I was a student. It's very easy to get lost in the acting. Okay, now I've got to act. I've got to do facial animation. I've got to do lip sync. I've got to do all of this stuff. It is very important to keep in mind that all of that stuff is built on top of your posing and your body mechanics. If you do not have a good pose, if your body mechanics do not work, everything up here, all the facial pose stuff, doesn't matter. And an example of this is if I take my pose here and I was to put a cube on top of his head, even though I'm dealing with an acting rig, he's got full facial controls. If I block out his head like this, let's just get the angle in there, something like that, it's still cool looking. It's still a dynamic pose. If I had this awesome facial pose and put a cube on top of the head and the rest of the body is just bland and boring, I'm missing a lot of my shot. So, very important to keep in mind that the face, as much as it can be tempting to dive into it and like go full out, you want to make sure your body mechanics are solid first.